Vinton and Lloyd's mother was living in Edmonton at the time and had heard that Bertha, Vinton's wife, was sick in the Athabasca hospital and wanted to go to see her. But owing to her arthritic condition, found it difficult to get on and off the train. So I volunteered to go along and assist in any way I could. We arrived in Athabasca, got rooms at the hotel, and then visited Bertha, who, by the way, had made a remarkable recovery from ruptured appendix. The next morning, we took the train to Collinton and found that Mr. Ramsey, the Anglican preacher, was going to the Plum Lake district. The little church is there, or it was there. It's, if you want to know where it is, it was 8 miles west of Boyle on the south side of the road. The Hutterites last winter or the winter before brushed the site down, so the site isn't there anymore. But anyway, he kindly took us out to Lloyd Hutton's in an old Model T Ford. That was my first introduction to Cache Creek District and my first opportunity of service for the Lord in the district. Mrs. Hutton said, "Billy, why not have a service on Sunday in the schoolhouse? They rarely have a service in this district." A meeting was arranged with a good number attending. Since that time, I have visited the district every year, sometimes having nightly evangelistic services with the schoolhouse packed to the door, and the good hymns of the faith were sung heartily and joyfully. I also had services in East Park. Incidentally, East Park is just up here on the corner, and Hallcroft Schools and the Elscott Community Hall. That was the old log one that was built there before the new one that got built in 1953. Brother John Summercall helped me for a number of years and endeared himself to the hearts of many. John loved to tell the old story of Jesus and his love. For the past 35 years, my wife and I had daily vacation Bible school at both Boyle and Cache Creek. Now this first Boyle book was published in 1980, so we're going back to 1955. We thank God for the opportunity of sowing the seeds of the Word of God in the hearts and lives of so many of the children, knowing that faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. Now, many of the old-timers have passed on. Some of their children still reside in the district and can look back, as I do, with happy memories of those days of friendliness when they had time to visit one another and the doors were open as a country preacher would come along and have a portion of the Word of God to share with them. The little school still stands and is used for daily vacation Bible school. May the Cache Creek School remain as a reminder of the good old days, not of prosperity and modern conveniences and facilities, but of neighborliness and friendship. It was while I was at Cache Creek that I first thought of having services at Boyle. I'd visited and held meetings in the Hallcroft, East Park, and Elscott districts. And the Lord said to his disciples in Mark 1:38, "Let us go into the next towns that I may preach there also." So the next town was Boyle. I think it was the winter of 1936. Excuse me. For I had old chum. I had lost his mate Buck the previous summer. I rented the McNamara Hall. He has in brackets, it was above the store. That store is still there. It's the Boyle Bar. For a week. So he rented the hall for a week and drove in from Vinton Hutton's 14 miles with chum and a little cutter. The weather turned intensely cold, between 30 and 40 below, and not too many ventured out. I well remember those drives home. I had put my horse in the livery barn in the afternoon as I went visiting around town, and after the meeting I'd start off to the Huttons. It was cold, so I'd wrap myself in a rug, tie the lines together and put them over my shoulder and go to sleep. Faithful old chum would jog along all the way to the Hutton's barn. I often slept until he stopped. It took just over 2 hours to make the trip. Later, a young fellow came to trust in the Lord in the Splane home by the name of Bob Remley. He'd come from the United States to visit his cousin Harvey Syme. After Bob was saved, developed well spiritually and was used of God to establish the work in Boyle. And he goes on to say it was in 1935 that two girls by the name of Eva Russell and Mary Taylor visited the Huttons. They'd played an important part in the work of the Lord in the area. Eva Russell sent out correspondence lessons, and many homes have a Bible which she gave as a reward. Mary Taylor was there when the first daily vacation school was held in the Veterans Log Hall. She later became my wife, and we have served the Lord together year after year. Our last Bible school was held in August at Ellscott, and what a happy surprise. It was a cozy night to be the guest of a lovely supper given as a token of appreciation and gratitude for our many years of service in the district. I've got a little note here on Mr. Fairholm. He kept a busy summer program. 3 weeks as director of Bethel Bible Camp, a week at Plover Lake Bible Camp, 1 week at Minnook DVBS, 2 weeks at Boyle and Cache Creek. Plus he spoke every Sunday at the chapel during DVBS and midweek service, and sometimes Fridays young people's. He looked after all the woodworking crafts for the boys. So now I'm going to just touch on the history of the chapel and the people that were involved. Back in the 1930s, the Ivies came from Collinton. The place across the road from Richard and Tracy's is where the Ivies lived. Bergs and Malmedals came from Amisk in the veteran area. They'd had 5 years of drought down there in the south, and we were getting a bit of rain up here, so they left real good land down here to come up so they could produce a little bit. 1939, Mom and Dad moved from 11 miles west of Boyle to our present home. And through the 40s, these folks gathered at Cache Creek East Park in the old Ellscott Hall. Prophetic Bible Institute sent students to the area. One of the students was, I guess they had finished college by the time they came here. Roland and Amy Knapp spent 1949 to 50 here. 1951, Robert and Netta Taylor spent a few months here while waiting for their visa to go to Portuguese Angola. Bob Remley had taken a real interest in Bible teaching. He married Evelyn Bird in July of 1951, and he taught us the Word of God for the next decade and maybe a bit more. I can remember DVBS in Boyle in 1953 at the old Legion Hall. Legion Hall there at that time was sitting basically where the new one is, and the community hall sat where they have that liquor store right next to it. Then going back 2 years, East Park, Cache Creek, and Gamefield schools were centralized to Ellscott. In 1951, the Cache Creek School was still available for young people, Sunday school and DVBS, and it was last used about 1980. For those of you that aren't from the area, Cache Creek School still stands there today. 1957 or 58, Bob Remley took the job as the Village of Boyle maintenance man. And that maintenance man gave him a policeman's uniform as well, so he was a policeman and the only one to grade the streets and do whatever else that they needed maintained at that time. About that time, the decision was made to build a chapel in Boyle. The lot was purchased from Mrs. Madsen Sr. for $250. Incidentally, she owned the half block that goes from the chapel down to Home Hardware. Somehow, Bob found the time and help to get the building framed, and some of the finishing at that time was hired. I believe it was June the 29th, the official opening of the chapel. 2 weeks ago we had Ross and Colleen Taylor here, and that may have been the first time they met. she was born in 58 and Ross was born in 59. I look around here and I don't see too many that were Errol and Fred, Barry and myself. I think. Is anybody else that was here in 59 for the opening of the chapel? So we'll have to go with that. It was just the four of us. 1960 or 61, the Remleys moved to Thorhill. Bob came back to speak most Sundays for a few years. Through the 70s, we were on our own as far as speakers were concerned. In 1980, Mr. Farrell asked Jim Pettiford to help with DVBS and suggested Jim and Jan might be a good fit for our assembly. May of 1982, Jim and Jan arrived. Soon after, started building their home in Boyle. Jim and Jan loved working with kids. And Jim was a good framer. And occasionally he'd do a little finishing too. Wasn't what he enjoyed, but he would do it. And Jan worked as a nurse. I never had her nurse me, but I assume she was very good at it. During the early 1990s, the addition to the chapel, Jim was responsible for that. During this time, the chapel was almost full for the Sunday services. Well, this part, Jan, you probably wish I had left out, but Jim sometimes referred to himself as rough around the edges. He could chug a lug 2 liters of pop. If you're young, don't bother trying it, because I'm not responsible for you drowning. And the next story is one of those that could be left out if it had to be, but I'm gonna read it. Just back in the before Jim and Jan came here, Jim was here for daily vacation Bible school in 2 years, but in 1980, during DVBS, he contacted a bad cold. He mentioned that he thought he should get a Nobel Prize in medicine for the discovery he made. Mom had been picking raspberries, and I've got to go to Dad for this story, and I don't know whether I could believe him totally, but Mom wasn't there to state anything else. But it was a big bowl that he pointed to, and he said Jim ate that full bowl of raspberries. He said he poured a quart of cream on it, and I think that was exaggerated a little bit, and a cup of sugar. Anyway, Jim's diagnosis was that he didn't dare cough or sneeze. Jim and Jan had 4 children, Karen, Ben, Matthew, and Brian. Ben was born with cancer in an eye. The cancer in the eye were both removed, and it looked promising. But the cancer returned and took his life, I believe December 18th, 1983. Give me a moment here, please. The last song they recall him singing was "Great is Thy Faithfulness, Lord, unto me." Jim and Jan left us in July 2002. We were able to function till the Peters arrived, July 2016. In 2013, Mike and Tatiana arrived. Mike suggested we contact Village Missions to see if they would be able to provide us a pastor. Henry Vandermeer got approval, and 2 years later, the Peters arrived. 90 years in 10 minutes. 60 years, chapel in Boyle.